Welcome to episode 8 of The Coin Pod, featuring another quality conversation with someone dedicated to building, studying, and using Bitcoin. My guest today is Ansel Lindner, host of Bitcoin and Markets, a show that cuts through the FUD, examining the markets, politics, money, and economics surrounding Bitcoin. Ansel is also a Bitcoin maximalist and minimalist. According to Ansel, being a Bitcoin maximalist gives you a rational foundation to evaluate the entire Bitcoin space. It's based on science and economics. It's the opposite of faith. It's an understanding of network effects, history, game theory, economics, and observational evidence, not being an expert in each, but knowing they work together. Today, Ansel joins me to chat about maximalism and minimalism, and why he is both a maximalist and minimalist. If you're not a Bitcoin maximalist and don't wish to become one, you probably shouldn't listen to this episode. The merits of maximalism and minimalism aside, Ansel's sharp intellect and composed disposition make his case for maximalism and minimalism difficult to dispute. But that's more than enough for me. Here's Ansel. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ansel.
Thanks, Zach. Great to be here.
Before we jump in, could you just tell us how you first got into Bitcoin, how you first encountered it, what brought you to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I remember reading about WikiLeaks in 2011 when they started accepting Bitcoin. And I have a degree in economics and math. And so I've always been interested in sound money. Bitcoin really automatically, piqued my interest, but I didn't get heavily into it until about a year after that. So when they had the first big bubble in 2012, that's when I really got deep into it.
You, and I'm sure many of our listeners, are also familiar with some of the other outspoken Bitcoin maximalists like Saifedean and Pierre and Michael and all these guys. If you were to give sort of like a one-sentence definition of maximalism and minimalism in a Bitcoin context, how would you describe it to someone?
I would say maximalism, you understand that Bitcoin has a lead in a protocol race that no one can catch. And minimalism is an idea of Bitcoin, like you want to keep the base layer, the base protocol layer, as clean and tight and robust in security and decentralization as possible. And then layers can be built on top of that.
In order to be a Bitcoin maximalist, or I guess as part of being a Bitcoin maximalist, does one also sort of have to adopt the idea of hyper-Bitcoinization that people from the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute have written about and continue to talk about? Are those sort of the 1-2 punch that you have to take both or neither? Or what's the relationship between, in your opinion, maximalism and hyper-Bitcoinization?
That's a really good question. I never thought about if they are mutually together, or if they could be mutually exclusive. But I think they probably go together. Yeah. Now, people's definition of hyper-Bitcoinization can be different. I think Bitcoin will be the value protocol on the internet. So whether everybody adopts Bitcoin itself, maybe not. Maybe there's like on layer 5, there's going to be some sort of side chain, and you buy into that side chain in your local area, and you have, your state. Because I think there's going to be breakups of these large nation states too, to like more regional powers. But so maybe your small country or regional power will have its own currency on layer 5. So yeah, I think that hyper-Bitcoinization depends on what your definition is, but I think they go together. Yeah.
Speaking of definitions, I'm curious to know your opinion on what seems to be two different takes of maximalism. One of them given by Stefan Livera. He this month, or just the other day, I guess, released a video of maximalism on Bitcoin maximalism, in which he explained it as the belief that Bitcoin will someday become the dominant money of the world, global reserve currency and global unit account and all of that. But then Kevin Pham sort of gave a more hardline definition of Bitcoin maximalism. He explains it as, he says, this is quoting a tweet from him, "Crypto is winner take all, blockchains are war, Bitcoin maximalism is logical." And then he goes on with a couple other statements. So what I see as the difference between those two is, one Kevin seems to be advocating maximalism as a winner takes all, kill everyone else, we're the last one standing, whereas sort of Bitcoin as a reserve currency seems to allow for other tokens, maybe on different layers or coexisting chains, to coexist with Bitcoin, sort of a dominance presence of Bitcoin versus a winner takes all, if that difference makes sense. What's your take on those two sort of nuances of maximalism?
I lean more towards FAM's definition. I think that blockchain's proof of work specifically is competitive, and for instance, this Bcash fork with Bitcoin, and they're competing for hash rate. Eventually, unless you're ideologically mining, which is possible, there's going to be a small percentage of people that just mine because they like wasting energy, but most people won't do that. Most people will, 99% of people will mine on the most profitable chain. So I think that, yes, it is war. Proof of work is war. I think if you're talking about like outside of that, like on different algorithms, there might be space for another currency that is super lightweight and super efficient. But we haven't like Mimblewimble might be that shot there, but I don't know if that's the case. I think that it's ultimately competitive, and it will be whittled down to one. Now, that's kind of unique in the world because it's money, right? We all have to have consensus on money. Now, we can go into an arcade and spend arcade tokens, and then we go in the same arcade, we can go and spend dollars at the grill to get some food or something. So there is room for small differences, but that arcade token can't be compared to the US dollar. So I think that is where we're going to see Bitcoin is the ultimate reserve currency. And then you'll have very niche uses of other things, but they would get more efficiency and more utility by just becoming some sort of side chain or layer on Bitcoin anyway. So they might as well do that.
I'm curious though, because something that was sort of formative for my somewhat agnostic opinion on maximalism was a lecture by Andreas where he sort of compares the two, well, I guess maybe by market cap, maybe not the two front runners anymore. I'm not sure. I don't really care about market caps. But he compares Ethereum and Bitcoin as sort of a lion and a shark, where they serve two different roles, live in two different environments, and my perception of maximalists is they like to compare them head to head and say 10 times out of 10 Bitcoin beats Ethereum, but the lion and the shark analogy by Andreas seems to put them in different roles altogether. What's your opinion on that? Do they go head to head, or do they serve completely different functions? What do you think?
I think that they serve different functions, or they're going for a different market. My critiques against Ethereum aside, I think that RSK will end up being better than Ethereum just for the fact that it's built on top of Bitcoin and it can use Bitcoin's decentralization and all that stuff. So yeah, if there's any utility in an altcoin, it's going to be amplified by being on top of Bitcoin.
Are there like a list of reasons, just besides the fact that it's sound money and the economics are there, like hardcore pillars that support your belief in maximalism?
Yeah, Trace Mayer and his network effects, that kind of sums up a lot of why I think that it's ultimately going to be the winner of these value protocols on the internet. So once you have a head start, the first mover advantage, you have the first mover advantage in developers, infrastructure, on and on and on. It's just basically impossible to catch unless there's some sort of bug that shows up. Then it could be caught.
Is there a point at which you may consider shifting to a different coin or something, or a threshold at which you may reconsider your maximalism, I guess?
I wrote an article for my podcast website last year, and it was called it was called 12 Rules of Thumb for Blockchain, But in there, I talk about the bootstrapping problem. And I think that now that Bitcoin exists, it's very, very hard for any coin to launch fairly because people know about it. With Bitcoin, it had its incubation period that enabled it to decentralize away from Satoshi. But now that's not possible. They have to make claims before they have code, et cetera, and everything just gets centralized around a small group of people and a small group of nodes. And once you centralize like that, it's very hard to get out of that and be secure. So there is a bootstrapping problem for altcoins. Bitcoin has another unique property about decentralization stuff is if something is threatening it, well, decentralization and being money, because if something's threatening it, there's a crap load of incentive to fix it. So if there's a real challenger, Bitcoin will be changed because the nodes and the users and everybody there will be almost automatic consensus. Like if Ethereum was really good tech, then Bitcoin would be scared and it would change itself to beat out Ethereum. So I think that's a kind of a unique thing in the incentive structure of Bitcoin.
I'm curious if you are of the opinion that a good maximalist would cash out and just dump all of their forked coins as quickly as possible, or just not touch them for the sake of not moving your Bitcoin, which presumably is in some sort of cold storage. Because I know there was one conversation I was watching on Twitter where two maximalists were going back and forth about this very issue. One of them saying, I don't want to hold anything but Bitcoin, BTC. And the other one was saying, no, I'm not going to move my BTC because so just screw all the forks. I don't care. I'm not touching my coins. What do you like? What's your take on that? Do you dump all your forks right away, or do you just not give a shit about them, or what?
I sold off Bcash. I haven't touched anything since then. I think they're pretty small. I mean, they're worthwhile to do for people, but it has much to do with maximalism. For example, I still own gold and silver, so I'm not completely out of other assets, but I think if you just airdrop me coins, well, I'll keep them as long as I think that it's okay for Bitcoin. If it's going to hurt Bitcoin, see, I'm part of Bitcoin's immune system unwillingly, but that's part of being in Bitcoin. And so to protect Bitcoin, I sell my Bcash, right? It's almost, I believe that, we're kind of this hive mind. We almost don't have free will in this whole system because that's a great example. Bcash was a threat, so people dumped it. This B Gold or Bitcoin Gold or Rhodium or whatever the other ones are, they're not threats, so they don't count. Like, we don't even care about them, basically. At least I don't. I know there's a lot of people out there that do, and I will care about big forks in the future. I don't think that these small forks, I believe in the diminishing returns of forks, but I do think every once in a while there's going to be a very big fork, and maybe once a year. I think we'll see one this year, maybe towards the end of the year, and I'll probably dump that one because I'm protecting Bitcoin.
If we can switch gears a little bit, I want to touch on minimalism a little bit. And so maximalism is sort of discussed on Twitter and in some Reddit feeds and something, but there's very little discussion actually using the phrase Bitcoin minimalism, at least that's searchable online. And so I have a couple questions, but on its face, it sort of makes sense that you want to approach changes to the chain as slowly and carefully as possible. And we've seen plenty of examples of screw-ups like the parity bug and other things on the Ethereum chain where arguably reckless decisions were made very quickly and billions of dollars were lost. How do you sell this minimalism saying changes should be made slowly for the good of the network, even though there are plenty of problems that should be fixed?
I don't think that minimalism necessarily means slow upgrades. I think it just means a minimal amount of upgrades, keeping the most, and I don't know where I saw this from, but I think I saw it on Twitter, and I liked it. And the person, whoever I saw, I'm going to have to go back and look, whoever I saw it from a couple years back, described it that way. And so I said, hey, I'm putting that in my Twitter handle. So that's what I did. And it's almost like a level 2 thing where when you first get into Bitcoin, you learn about Bitcoin maximalism. And then once you have some more chops in it, then you start, well, what's this minimalism thing? And it kind of makes you start questioning yourself all over again. And I like that about it. So, yeah.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. I opened the show reading some of your the thread that I first came across the other day, and then tweeted at you about it, messaged you about it, and then here we are now for this episode. But you say a couple times, and it's a pretty common critique that of Bitcoin as a whole, I guess, not just maximalism, but sort of maybe even anyone who owns an altcoin, that it's very religious or cultish in its nature. And you pretty directly say, no, it's the opposite of faith. It's based on many other things. And I'm curious to know how do you shoot down this sort of religious objection, I guess, to Bitcoin and maximalism more specifically?
That's a really good question. I think there is a element of spiritualism, maybe you'd call it, in Bitcoin. I think the market itself, once you kind of understand the free market and how it works, the invisible hand sort of idea, it's almost a spiritual experience. Like, oh my God, if everybody is looking out for number one, then they're off. Like it's almost magical the way it works. So I think that kind of shows in Bitcoin for sure. But maximalism to me is not a religion, because it is based off some of these ideas that we've talked about here already. It's based off history of economics. It's based off of economic theory. It's based off of technology history and theory of how these protocols scale out and how they work. So yeah, to me, it's the opposite. I go out and look for information and look for the truth, where I think a faith or a religion, you're not actively looking for the truth. You're just, praying all day long.
I pulled a tweet from Pierre a little while ago. He said, altcoiners and no-coiners don't understand the reasoning behind Bitcoin maximalism. They just know they disagree with it. And I think I wanted this to sort of serve as a maximalism and minimalism 101 for our listeners and everyone else, because a lot of the critiques against Bitcoin maximalism that I'm reading are just critiques against cryptocurrency in general and are sort of dumb, like it can't scale or people won't use it and that sort of thing. And I'm like, well, that's not very specific or helpful, because, I mean, there's a dozen reasons why that critique itself is dumb. But I'm curious if you could tell our listeners the list of resources you mentioned, your website, your URL, and anything else that on your site that they might find useful to educate themselves. Where can we find that list?
Yeah, I'm in the process of maybe redoing the website. I haven't updated it in a while. Other than the resources page I have is bitcoinandmarkets.com/resources. And so you can go there. I'm also working on a glossary page so if people come across the term FUD or flippening or whatever, they can go to that glossary page. And I already have 100 terms, and it just keeps growing every day, because we don't realize when we talk, we're in this world. And when we talk, we use a whole different vocabulary. And so if you're wanting to reach these people, it goes hand in hand with the resources page. You run across a term that you don't know, then you can go to the glossary and look it up. So bitcoinandmarkets.com/resources. Can I say another couple words about Pierre's thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The thought I had when you were saying that is that a lot of people think Bitcoin is a company, and I've run across this a lot. I think mainly people that are anti-Bitcoin maximalism think of Bitcoin as a company, as MySpace or AOL, and that it can be caught. But once you kind of look at it from the perspective of, no, it has the network effects, it will never be caught. then you are more receptive to maximalism, and you see, oh, layer 2 is exciting, and all these things. You also see other people as attackers. I think that I've started classifying a lot of these altcoins as attacks on Bitcoin. On my podcast, I talked about the market cap attack several months back, and that's kind of come true. I think, if there's a thing that's measured, somebody was saying this the other day, if there's a thing that's measured, then, it'll be managed. So there's people were measuring market cap, and so we compete on market cap, even though that has nothing to do with the ultimate success or failure of a protocol. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mentioned, and there's been a couple articles, I forget who wrote them, maybe someone from the Coin Center, somebody else, about how, one, the market cap, and two, the price, don't really matter, and in some cases are the least interesting things about everything in this space. But one of the last tweets I wanted to mention is from David Shares, who is a researcher, developer, writer. He used to work at MySpace and formerly with blockchain and that sort of thing. And towards the middle of December, he tweeted, 2017 is the year in which Bitcoin maximalism died. I, for one, am looking forward to 2018 and beyond, with multiple blockchains and decentralized networks prevailing. Then he later in the discussion and to some response tweets, he says he used to be a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist, but the sort of market cap metric that you mentioned sort of what he said that killed Bitcoin maximalism. Do you, besides just since it's their talking point, non-maximalist talking point that they use against maximalists, do you care about the market cap at all, or what would you have to say to this tweet by David that 2017 is the year maximalism died because of the whole market cap battle?
I remember that tweet, actually. I don't know, maybe I responded to it, but I think that maybe it's just the next phase. It definitely didn't die, right? And it's a learning experience. Everybody's learning here. So Bitcoin maximalists, I didn't become super hardcore in being a Bitcoin maximalist until 2 years ago, right? So the first 3-4 years I was interested in Bitcoin, I wasn't a maximalist. It's kind of a phase thing that you go through. And maybe maximalism is going to have to come up with new terms. Instead of talking about market cap, we're going to talk about something else. It's a war of rhetoric as well. But no, I don't think it died at all. I think this market cap thing was just, I go off on a lot of tangents, as you can see, but I think that the big altcoin boom was healthy for Bitcoin because it took a lot of speculators out of the market. So we saw a huge 10x run in Bitcoin, but without so many altcoins, maybe there's only a handful of altcoins and most money went into Bitcoin. Bitcoin would have gone up 100x, but then it would have crashed all the way back down to 1,000. So letting the speculators go and speculate on Ripple and Ethereum and all the ICOs and things actually protects Bitcoin in a way, keeps Bitcoin more in strong hands and lets it grow, almost takes a lot of that pump and dump drama out of Bitcoin.
I guess so. On maximalism, I have one more question, and then I want to wrap up with a two couple things. In the tweet, the series of tweets that I open with, one of the last things you say in response to someone who is responding to you, the art of travel, you say it's saying it's 100% impossible for Bitcoin to fail or to be replaced isn't what I'm saying. And when I read that, it reminded me of this article from the Telegraph news outlet a couple years ago, in 2015, actually. Wow, shit, almost 3 years to the day. Matthew Sparks wrote, economic predictions are unreliable at the best of times with centuries of historic data. So claiming to be able to prognosticate an unprecedented experiment in cryptocurrency, talking about Bitcoin, is foolhardy. He said the title of the article is "Bitcoin Might Be Dead, It Doesn't Matter," and it crashed 43% in the beginning of 2015, and now we see the beginning of 2018 crashing 50-60% too. Do you view Bitcoin as an experiment? Because you say it's not 100% impossible for it to be replaced. How does that how does that inform your view of maximalism and Bitcoin? Is it an experiment? Can it be replaced? I guess, do any other coins interest you at all? Huge question, I guess, but yeah.
I don't think it's 100% impossible, because I take like a cryptography aspect here, is that nothing is impossible. It's just highly improbable. So yeah, it's just highly improbable that Bitcoin will fail at this point. I would go as far as to say 99 to, maybe 99.99% that it's not going to fail, and it's going to be the dominant winner in the end, dominant protocol. So yeah, I'm not invested. I do have 3 Litecoins because someone donated to the show, but I don't have any other altcoin, and I'm just not really interested in investing in them at this point. I think that they're like the privacy coins you mentioned. There is something to be said about experimenting outside of Bitcoin. Will they be successful? I don't think so long term, but they could be valuable. I would almost look at investing in altcoins like a donation to a nonprofit research center. You're never going to get it back. Maybe you'll never get it back, but you're helping research. I did say earlier, just about 20 minutes ago, that all altcoins are a tax on Bitcoin. Maybe that's too harsh. I think that it would be better if these developers worked on Bitcoin itself, but sometimes, you don't want to deal with the strict process that has to do with core. You want to go off and have some freedom to try your own thing and do your own thing, and that would be on an altcoin. But you have the idea, you're never trying to challenge Bitcoin or be Bitcoin. You're just doing your own thing. And then eventually maybe you'll work that back into Bitcoin later once your kind of experiment is done. So I think that's a good way to look at it. I just don't think any of these altcoins are going to have value in 5 years.
I like that analogy, though, sort of treating it as a donation to someone for their research, not expecting to give it back. I think that would change a lot of people's opinions on selling their Bitcoin.
Yeah, think about Monero, they're doing awesome stuff, completely unique. And so, yeah, investing in Monero as a kind of a donation would be a good way to think about it. And that would make it more competitive too. That way those people would compete for cutting edge tech instead of compete for like who has the most dancing girls on stage at your DevCon, right? That's not what you want to compete with against.
I do want to close with one question, sort of totally unrelated, and I love, I guess 2 questions. Is there, you mentioned the resources on your website, but is there sort of like one book or one article or one resource in particular that anyone who's new to Bitcoin, I mean, maybe besides the white paper, obviously, but you tell them you need to read this, their opinion or their insight is just essential, go read this. Is there like one resource like that for you that you give to people?
Well, there might be one resource per kind of topic. For the economics, I would say the Reid Rothbard, Austrian economists, get into Rothbard because he's probably he's super easy to read and you can read it really fast, even though the books are pretty thick. But as a tech book, I would read Sovereign Individual, because that one talks about how we're going to, the death of the nation state and how technology is going to bring that about. So it's really, really interesting. For example, I think that Roger Ver is the first I would classify as sovereign individual. He kind of lives outside of his own money, that he can't be touched. It's, they can't seize his bank accounts and things like that. He's a very powerful man. He could have an army if he wanted to.
Well, Ansel, on that note, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, chatting with you about maximalism and minimalism. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Zach.
This CoinPod has been a production of You, Me, and BTC. Special thanks to my colleagues Tim Baker and Daniel Brown, and of course to my guest, Ansel. You should follow Ansel on Twitter at Ansel Lindner, spelled Lindner. and his show Bitcoin and Markets at BTCMRKTS or bitcoinandmarkets.com. Visit his site /resources to find all the educational materials he mentioned earlier to educate yourself on Bitcoin, maximalism, and more. As always, if you've missed a CoinPod, you can find every episode at thecoinpod.com. And after you listen, message me on Twitter at thecoinpod with your comments, criticisms, and suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the show. I love hearing from my listeners. We'll be back next week with another CoinPod, so until then, cheers.